Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the QUT Faculty of Law for today's conference on intellectual property and education in the age of COVID. As is always the case, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, and in keeping with the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where QUT now stands and recognise that these have always been places of teaching and learning, and we wish to pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people continue to play within the QUT community. And in the context of debates around intellectual property and education, there has been very significant discussion about the importance of Indigenous intellectual property. Today's event is going to look at some of the relationships and connections and intersections between intellectual property and education. It will cover many different species of intellectual property, spanning copyright law, trademark law, patent law, trade secrets, and questions of licensing. In many ways, the conference today is also going to span an array of different disciplines within education, everything from the creative industries to medicine and biotechnology and even clean technology. In addition, this event is also going to focus upon open licensing within the educational institutions. So the use of open licensing to promote open access, open innovation and open data is also a very kind of important dimension in terms of the debate and discussion over intellectual property and education. This event is also going to focus upon the role of universities and educational institutions and research organisations in responding to the coronavirus COVID-19 public health crisis. So universities and research institutions have a very particular special role to play as keystones in the knowledge infrastructure. They are generating a whole wide range of technologies that could be of use in tackling the coronavirus crisis, including vaccines, treatments and diagnostics, as well as a range of other public policy solutions. So this event, amongst other things, is going to think about ways and means in which we can encourage public transfer of some of those research and public policy solutions. Finally, this event is also going to be an Australian launch for this research handbook on intellectual property and technology transfer, edited by Professor Jacob Rooksbury from Gonzaga Law School. This collection provides a comparative analysis of how an array of different countries manage intellectual property and technology transfer from educational institutions, and also kind of includes a contribution by myself looking at intellectual property and higher education and 3D printing. So welcome everyone. I hope you enjoy today's range of presentations looking at different aspects of intellectual property and education. Thank you. Canada is renowned for its expertise in patent law, policy and practice, and is notable for lots of leaders in the field of patent scholarship. And we're kind of delighted to have a Canadian patent expert in Dr. Nancy Kong, who got her PhD in economics from Dalhousie University. She is now a research fellow at the Centre for Behavioural Economics, Society and Technology, BEST, at QUT. And today she'll be presenting a joint paper on computational linguistic examination of readability and disclosure among university and firm patents. Dr. Nancy Kong.
Hi everyone. So today I'm going to present this joint paper with Dr. Uwe Dulleck, Adam Jaffe, Shupeng, Sowmya, Vajjala. Adam Jaffe is from the US, MIT, Brandeis University, and Shupeng is from Queensland. Sowmya is from the National Research Council of Canada. So let's get started. So first is the motivation of our paper. There are two main purposes of the patent system. The first one is to incentivize disclosure, incentivize innovation. The second one is to disclose the innovation. However, the previous study have mainly focused on how to incentivize the innovation, where largely neglect the disclosure level of the patent documents. However, the disclosure is really important because patent system is acting in a way that they disclose, the inventors disclose their invention secret in exchange for the societal protection. And higher disclosure has a very positive effects on the following inventions and the technological diffusions. So there is a bargain between society and the inventors. However, the different entities may have different ways, different incentives to how much, in terms of how much they want to disclose their invention. So this study going to fill the gap of looking at the extent of disclosure that actually occurs in patent documents. So overview of our paper, the research question is, if patent disclosure levels vary by business models of patent applicants. So our hypothesis is that universities disclose more than firms in their patent applications. The rationale is that universities' income, the patent income, mainly coming from licensing innovations, whereas the firms generate their income, patent income, mainly from the in-house commercialization. Therefore, they have different strategies in terms of how much information they want to disclose. Our results show that firms' patents are much harder to read. To be exact, there is 0.44 standard deviation more difficult to read than university patents, and it requires 1.2 years more education to comprehend than university patents. So some background of patent strategic disclosure hypothesis. First of all, it is a legal requirement to disclose the technology information in the patent. So according to the US Code 35, the patentability requires the adequate description requirement of patents. So it specifically said the three requirements, which is enablement, best mode, and written description requirements, which means that people who are skilled in the art would be able to understand, use, and make the invention that is described in the patent. However, in the real world, technology information contained in the patent documents are often inadequate and unclear, and that has been recorded by like a few previous studies. So our co-author Adam Jaffe, his previous work, very influential work, have outlined that agents involved in innovation or technology commercialization behave strategically different, like in terms of the disclosure levels. So universities, mainly they focus on generating income from licensing their innovation. Therefore, they have a high incentive to disclose more in their patent application. They are also bounded by high moral requirements of university research, and also they are less likely to have technology transfer, especially in-house technology production. Firms, on the other hand, they focus on in-house production, therefore they are less likely to disclose their invention to deter their competitors from entering the same type of production. So in finance and accounting literature, readability has already been used as a proxy for disclosure. They raised this hypothesis called incomplete revelation hypothesis. It basically said that more complex texts require more information processing costs for the investors in the financial literature. So firms in finance, firms would, if they do badly, they have more incentives to cover up by making the annual report harder to read. So we argue that documents in like patent documents, which are different from annual reports, but they are all subject to regulation, and the regulation is for the purpose of foster disclosure. But the party who complete the document may have the incentive to obscure the information. So although what we are looking at is different from the finance and accounting literature, but the purpose and the research question we are looking is very similar. So how do we measure readability? This is a screenshot from the website Conversation, the Conversation website. Website is to foster communication from the academic research to general audience. So they really wanted the article to be more understandable and reach a wide audience. So what they are saying here is basically that they measure how many sentences do you have in a paragraph and how many complicated words you have in a sentence, and don't verb nouns and don't use jargons. So if you reach all these criteria, then your articles are more likely to be understood by a wider audience. So similarly, what we use are traditionally used by other by the finance and accounting literature, which is the Fogg measure, Flash measure, and the Kincaid measure. So let's look at the Fogg measure first. This is the most popular measure. So Fogg measure consists of ASL, which is average sentence length, and RHW, which is a ratio of hard words to all words. So they combine these two and get a value, and this value corresponds to the year of formal education in order to understand the text in the first reading. So it translates directly to the years of education. Very similarly, Kincaid, which consists of the value of average word length in syllables and average sentence length. It also corresponds with the US grade level that required to understand the text. So those two measures, Fogg and Kincaid, are positively correlated to hard to read measure, which means like a higher the value is, the more difficult the text is. Flash, on the other hand, consists of average word length and average sentence length. It ranges from 0 to 100, with 0 being the most hard to read. So 0 would require a professional reader in that field, where 100 means only require 5th grade of US primary school level. So I use this positive and negative to infer that how in relation to hard to read. So on top of those measures that have already been used in the previous literature, we also propose 3 different levels of features in the linguistic literature. That is lexical feature, syntactic feature, and discourse feature. So those 3 features act like a pyramid in the linguistic study. So lexical, you can think of like building block, which is words and grammas. And syntactic is the sentence structure. Discourse is coming more from like how the paragraph is coherent and how they reference referential cohesion in text. So for each one, we have a bunch of variables to capture the feature, but we just chose one indicator as the example of the feature. This one are kind of like easily understand by non-linguists and also mostly commonly used. So for lexical feature, we use word type and token ratio. So type and token describe the number of unique words versus the total words. So syntactic feature use the dependent clause ratio. So it's the number of dependent clauses over the total clauses. And disclose feature look at the number of content words overlap of all sentence pairs over the total number of sentences. So the content word is the words that has actual meanings. So it excludes the words such as the, things like that. Okay. Then we move on to the next section, data. So we obtain our text, the full text of patent data from lens.org. So it's a free, open website, has all the patent data. So we limit our data to US patent application from 2000 to 2019, 20 years of data. We look at 3 cutting-edge industries. They are nanotechnology, battery, and photoelectric. So we stripped the technical description text file from the full text file. So we are not looking at the claims and headers because we are more interested in the technological description disclosure. And then we feed those texts into the linguistic programs to get this 102 linguistic programs, and then we limited it to 64 linguistic indicators that have been proven to related to readabilities in the previous literature. Then we obtain the metadata from the lens that includes some other patent features such as who are the inventors, who are the applicants, the patent counts, the family, simple and extended family size, and things like that. So we merge the metadata with the linguistic indicators to get our full data sets. Then we identify the university patents versus firm patents by going through the name. So if the name is ended in univ, inst, and college, so we know it's a university patents, versus firms are usually identified as Inc., Ltd, Corp, LLC, or Co. So in our sample, there are 8% of university patents, which consists of more than 3,000 university patents, and the firm patents accounts for 21,000. There are also both and others. So both is filed both by university and firm together, and others can be by government, government and individuals. So here is an example of university patent abstract. So we can see that the words are generally easier. So the blue light is the highlight is the difficult words, and the sentence is shorter. So the Gunning-Fox index is 21, so require 21 years of formal and education in order to understand this in the first reading. Versus the firm patent, so we can see there's a lot more hard to read words, and actually the Gunning-Fox index require 46 years of education in order to understand in the first reading. Descriptive analysis, so we have the means and standard deviations in terms of university patents versus firm patents, and we can see that all these measures are significantly different for university and firms. So firm, Kincaid and Flash shows that it's all more difficult for firms than universities. Baseline estimation. So we run OLS regression. On the left-hand side is the 64 linguistic indicators. And on the right-hand side, we mainly interested in this firm dummy variables. So if it's filed by firm, it's 1. If it's not, then it's 0. So we control for both and others. So use university as base. We also control for the citation counts, family sizes, and so on. We control for sub-classification fixed effects. So there are certain fields might be more competitive than others that would be absorbed in these fixed effects. The hypothesis is this firm is significantly different from the university, which is the baseline, and positively correlated with hard to read. And we can see that when we run regression, we show that fog measure is 1.4, which means that it is 1.4 years harder to read than universities. And the rest is consistent with what we see in the beginning. And to put together, we find that among 64 indicators, there are 38 linguistic indicators that are statistically significant different between firms and universities. So we do find strong evidence in the difference. Then we put all these 64 measures into one synthetic measures using principal component analysis so that the results are easier to comprehend. So here we redo the estimate. We find that firms have a 4.2 standard deviation harder to read than firms. Firms are harder to read than universities. So another consideration is that firms and universities may be driven by the difference may be driven by the nature of inventions. So we use the cited patent fixed effects to control for that. The rationale is that patent applications cite the same patent will be somewhat similar inventions. So if we control for the same cited patents, then we can control for the nature of the technology. So we redo the estimation using this cited patent effects. Because we have a large number of cited patents, we want to compress them so that we don't have overwhelmingly number of right-hand side variables. In order to do that, we use this lasso linear post-double selection inference model to control. So this model would select the variables that are significant in our estimation. So we put all these other variables as must-have and select the number of the 6,000 fixed groups to be whether included or not. And here is what we find using the principal component analysis, the synthetic variable, as well as other traditional measures. We find that our results are very similar to what we had before. That is to say, the difference is not driven by the nature of technology. So we then extract the number of examples in the text file. So to explore the channels why firms would be more difficult to read. So the rationale is that the best mode of invention has to be mentioned because of the legal requirement. So firms maybe use more lists of examples to hide the best mode in order to deter the following inventions by their competitors. So we find that number of examples are positively correlated to hard to read by PCA and flash measure. And the firm's measure has decreased a little bit, which means that the difference has been absorbed by the number of examples that control in the estimation. To sum up, so we find the evidence that firm patterns are more difficult to read using fog, flash, and Kincaid measures. We also find a significant difference between firm and university in terms of lexical, syntactic, and discourse features. We show that The firm application require 1.1 to 1.6 years more formal education to read. Principal component analysis shows firm patents are 0.43 standard deviation more difficult to read using these synthetic variables. In the future, we plan to test the findings using the engineer students' subjective evaluation to validate our measures. And so we will continue our paper that way, but our paper using analysis of linguistic characters of patent text is a very promising area for future research. Thank you very much.